tell me about a time when something in your personal life impacted your professional life or vice versa, and tell me the whole story of what happened and how you grew as a result.
So I grew up in a very playful family and got to see through my parents what it looks like for people to play into adulthood, which is a rare thing. And
Mm,
my parents used play in my dad in his business as an entrepreneur and an engineer, like who's always tinkering and inventing, how he
yeah.
used his curiosity and his experimental mindset to get those things done. And then how he also translated that into the kitchen and, cooking
Mm,
stuff. I saw how my mom used wonder and awe as a way to move through illness that she lived with and through
yeah.
grief. And so, and her creative expression, how creative expression for her was just part of her wellness practice and was something that she did just for her. So I got to see that like through my parents. And then when I went out into the world and I came to New York to go to art school, that playful spirit was very much part of how I existed. And I went to art school, which is really all about, honing those playful skills of
Mm,
experimentation, curiosity, and expression. So those were all like so core to who I am, how I operate. And when I was 24, I was working at a magazine, but I started Refinery 29
mm,
really as a side project. I didn't actually know that it would go anywhere, but I was following my curiosity and was
yeah.
very inspired by the independent designers and boutique owners in New York. And this wanted to create something that was an expression of independent style, of different, looking at style not through the lens of rules and, wear this, don't wear that, but through the
Mm,
lens of expression and identity. And so when I started the company, all those playful skills that I had were really helpful in a startup, right? Because you're
yeah.
trying things, you're failing, you're learning. It's all tinkering and
Yeah.
it's all play. And, I was so passionate too about like the creative expression and helping our audience to tap into their own creative expression. So things were going great and the company was growing and then it grew and it grew and it grew. And finally we got to this point where we're hiring all these, more corporate people that come from more traditional backgrounds. They have great, credits to their name. And they started coming and just bringing a different kind
Mm,
of G. And they were much more zipped up in their serious suits. They
mm,
were speaking in these acronyms that I didn't understand. They were saying things that I didn't understand. And I started to feel like the art school kid at the adults table. I
mm,
started to have this deep imposter syndrome and feel like maybe I wasn't the right person to bring the company forward because I didn't fit, the energy that they were bringing. And so, and I, thought I didn't fit the mold of like the serious business person.
mm,
And so I started to actually pack away some of those playful qualities. I didn't wanna ask questions because I didn't want it to be so obvious that I didn't know what was going
mm.
on. I didn't wanna bring my humor to the table because I didn't wanna be seen as, unserious.
Yeah.
I started to float less wild ideas because I didn't wanna be seen as a dreamer,
Mm,
unrealistic. And in doing so, I found myself laying on the floor of my apartment sobbing and sobbing about what a failure I was,
mm,
and it was in a moment where I think the outside world would have seen where the company was at and seen me and said, "This is like a pinnacle of her success," but
yeah.
I was so brittle. I was
Mm,
so, like, depleted, and in that moment, I also wrote this list of 9 ways that I was failing, and I wrote that I was failing as a leader, I was failing, in these creative projects that I was leading, I was failing as a friend because I wasn't available for my friends. I was failing in my fertility because I didn't have time to go to my appointments and figure out what was going on with my
mm,
body. There's this whole list, all these ways I was failing, and it was really like a moment where a couple of days later, I saw the list on the table and I thought, "Oh no, babe.
mm, mhm.
This is not it." But in that moment, I really thought I was not the right person for my company. I was thinking like, "I'm gonna
Yeah,
have
yeah.
resign," and I had all these, like, all these thoughts, and then I realized that I was overworked and underplayed, and
Mhm.
fortunately for me, I was
Mm,
working with a coach at the time. Yeah, I was
love
overworked,
that. So good.
I was working with a coach at the time, and I was telling her what was going on and how I was, hitting this point where I felt like who I was up to that point wasn't gonna get me to the next point. And she said, "Why do you think that the qualities that got you to this point where you're actually able to hire all these incredible, like, qualified people from these corporate backgrounds, why do you think that she can't get you to the next place? Why do you think you have to become someone else to get there?" And she said, "What if you lean into the qualities that got you here?" And so we talked about what are the qualities that got me here, and it was, my curiosity, my experimental mindset, my creativity, my playful
Yeah.
spirit. And so she said, "I'm gonna give you a challenge. Like, what if you intentionally lean into those and see if they can help you to grow?" And
Yeah.
so, with curiosity, I was scared to ask questions in meetings because I thought I would be laughed out of the room when everyone
Mhm.
saw that I didn't know what was going on. So I said, "Okay, challenge accepted." And I went into these meetings and I started asking questions.
Mm.
And I thought people were gonna snicker at me and shake their head. And what actually happened was people started to lean in to hear the
Mm.
answer. And people came up to me after the meeting and they said, "Thank you for asking that question. I had no idea what that person was saying." And so what I realized was as I leaned into these powers of play intentionally, not only was I helping myself to get answers, to learn, to grow, but I was helping the people around me who were too scared to be vulnerable enough to do the same.
Mm.
And so that was a huge unlock for me. And it was a moment where I realized that those powers of play were superpowers and that I could
Yeah.
use them as my superhero cape to fly into these new situations, that were uncomfortable, that were unfamiliar, but where they actually could help me to grow to the place I needed to grow to.
Wow. This is truly such a beautiful story, and I know that the moment you said the words overworked and underplayed, people listening are gonna be like, "Woof, I am that," because I think it is so prevalent that people are underplayed and underexposed to their own like, the version of themselves that still lives and breathes inside of them, looking for the opportunity to 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 play again, to come alive again. And I think it's so powerful to have a coach come alongside you and say, "No, you actually need to double down on the very things that make you different, that make you creative, that make you push the boundaries because you're not trying to fit in anyone's box. You're trying to enjoy the you're trying to live into the pure joy, bliss, and curiosity of play, and I think that is just so beautiful. I'm curious when, you started talking about your parents modeling the way of play, and I do think that's really unique, and
Mhm,
I'm just curious, as you have a family and it's you have now thought about how to continue that legacy of play in your personal life. I'm curious how you've done that, like how you are keeping that part of like the legacy really of your family.